You are listening to PatchBay on tymkrs.
Welcome to PatchBay, conversational podcast all about audio equipment, music, audio engineering, recording, live sound, and usually food for some reason.
Yeah, and 9 times out of 10, anything that we talk about with food usually has the word epic in front of it. If you haven't already noticed, that's the word of the day the last little while. It reminds me of Sesame Street.
Yeah. Today's podcast is brought to you by Epic Nachos.
Anyway, so last week was fun, and I think we should maybe carry on the discussion about your and Addie's trip. I'm calling it the circle trip because that's what it sort of sounded like, really, eh?
Well, this one was more of a let's go that way, then down, then back up, and then back that way sort of thing.
I wish I had the gall to do that. Well, maybe partially because I know if I just keep going west in Canada, I'm going to end up in mountains, and I really don't want to have to deal with going downhill.
Oh my gosh, the mountains are the best, though.
Yeah, I'm a wuss.
You gotta do it, though. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, I'm a wuss.
Do it after the passes are open, though, because, man, putting chains on stinks.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. I've done Ontario, and Ontario is no fun at the best of times. But anyway, so what other interesting stories happened other than getting a really nice gift from Addie? Yeah, if anybody hasn't listened to the Zombie Tech episode with me, and it's she doesn't have Whiskers, and Whiskers taking that back now because he got an extremely nice gift. For his birthday.
I don't know. Nice.
Still sleeping on the couch though. But anyway.
Nice gifts aren't enough to stop me from picking on Addie. It's kind of my job.
Yeah, it's nice to pick on them. I find sometimes with Jen too. Because I tend to sort of miss having a brother around that I can pick on. So I tend to sort of do that to her once in a while. And then I realize, no, I really shouldn't be doing this as much as I do. But yeah, it's still fun.
Addie's the type that she is absolutely so convinced that she's the coolest person on the universe that picking on her really has little effect.
Yeah, she's a good sport so far, or at least she seems to be a fairly good sport. So this is always a good thing. So my one complaint is that you guys didn't come to Manitoba, so you're going to have to make a stop and get passports and get over the border at some point in time. So we can take you for Epic Nachos and the Forks, which is like the place where everybody takes any traveler to. So
yeah, I'm tripped out for the moment though. So
maybe next year if you guys go to Parallax. Parallax? How do you say it?
Parallax.
Parallax. Anyway, sounds like a scary alien boss.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah, Gamma World kind of thing.
Parallax is actually an effect used in retro games where they scroll the foreground at a different speed than the background so that it looks like there's depth.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you have the floor, or the con, as it were.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what kinds of stuff we did that the audio geeks out there would get a kick out of. I know game audio has come up several times on this show, and one of the places we got to stop and hang out at was pretty. Okay, so you've heard of like Portal, right? The game.
Portal, yeah.
And
yeah.
Steam.
Steam, yeah. People are really addicted to Steam lately.
Yeah, that whole game distribution system and all that. So those things are like products of Valve Corporation. And a lot of my friends got hired by them this last year or so. So while I was in Bellevue, Washington, I actually got to go into Valve and hang out in the hardware research and development laboratory with all of the hardware guys.
Nerd alert. That sounds like fun.
So yeah, I obviously can't say too much about what I saw there, but
right, highly confidential. Like
seriously,
Roswell.
Yeah, like
really?
yeah.
There
There's
was
like
good stuff. Anyway,
dudes in
right?
suits with like microphones, in their ears.
The Men in Black.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen? Do you guys ever get Unsolved Mysteries down south?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, of course, right. I was watching it on my Blu-ray player. I sort of hooked up to the YouTube channel, and there's a crap load of episodes up there of Unsolved Mysteries, and there's one episode all on the Men in Black, and which there's the comic books and the movies and stuff, but apparently a actual real thing. I didn't know that it was sort of a real kind of what's the word? Urban legend kind of thing. But if you get a chance, I'll put it in the show notes. The Unsolved Mysteries episode of Men in Black, and just kind of reminds me of this. It's very secretive kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, a lot of the guys that work there are just regular guys. They just got sucked into the black hole, we call it.
Right.
So I have known most of these folks for a long time, and it was fun going there and seeing what drew them into the black hole and why they stayed there. It's pretty nifty. Yeah. The toys they have in that laboratory are just beyond imagining. It's just millions and millions and millions of dollars of test equipment and prototyping stuff and 3D printers that are the size of large refrigerators and, just ridiculously cool.
Unfortunately, if I had a 3D printer, I'd probably just make Dungeons and Dragons miniatures, I think.
Yeah, probably be okay for that.
Yeah, that's probably what I end up doing. Anyway.
Yeah, so they've got their recording studios there for all their voiceover work and Foley work and all that. And I was going to go up there and look at them, but it was so fun hanging out with the hardware nerdy guys that I didn't feel like interrupting the visit to take the tour up that way. Because, it's just going to be some booths and mics and stuff, nothing too exciting. But I could have if I wanted to.
Yeah, no kidding. I've gotten to those positions too, where you're just having so much fun in the moment that you forget about what the original purpose was or whatever, and that's cool. And like you say, you've seen one recording studio.
Yeah, if you've got a chance to look at a vocal booth or talk to a guy who's built his own scanning electron microscope, yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I was having this conversation with these some hip hop cats just lately that want to come into the studio, and the guy was talking about vocal booths and stuff, and well, they were just checking out my room, and the guy, I said, like 90% of the time, I always kind of record vocals in the big room, not like my little isolation booth, and because most of these hip hop guys will tend to sort of build these really crappy isolation booths in a closet that are like so dead, like the guys are like leaning up against parkas in the back end of the room and stuff like this. And I said, like I always feel like the hip hop it sounds much more live and much more, awesome in the big room. Like I would or I've done stuff where I've done, the verse or something in the dead room, and then the hook chorus in the big room, so you get a little bit more bounce back, or even like the double takes and stuff, like just to switch it up, and it just amazes me the way these guys build these rooms. It's like, like I would I would rather record in a totally square room with a shit ton of reflections than in a closet any day of the week. And I'm sure you probably would feel the same way, right?
Yeah, I got a perfect example of that on my trip, actually. So one of the guys that I got to hang out with, he designs microcontrollers, like he designs the actual way that it works underneath everything. So seriously, genius esoteric sort of work, right?
Right.
And this guy sort of needs to work in a vacuum to even do that job. And so he's got this farm out in the middle of nowhere, and that's where he has his office, and he just goes into the company when he has to. But out there, he's got a really big barn, because it's like a walnut farm or whatever. And inside of his barn, he built his office inside of a room inside the barn. And in there are, oh, shoot, I can't remember what they are. People would probably be drooling if they heard the name, but I didn't write it down or anything. He's got
It sounds cool.
he's he's got a turntable and amplifiers and speakers in there, and this guy's fairly well to do, so we're talking about like $20,000, $30,000 level stuff here.
Yeah. Yeah. The record turntable needle is worth what we make in a year, kind of.
Well, in his case, he wasn't too pleased with the more expensive, the big heavy turntables. He didn't really like them very much. He likes the high torque stuff,
Right.
for various reasons. I mean, anybody who knows about this stuff is already familiar with the reasons why you'd want more torque than more stable, less weight on your platter. So anyway,
Well,
he's
yeah.
more of a torque guy. So his turntable is actually just a Technics.
Oh yeah,
you know,
1200 probably.
a good Technics with the direct drive and all that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
it's a very high end DJ turntable, but he's got the Grado needle on it, and Grado makes very, very nice stuff. I would love to have a pair of their headphones. Too expensive.
You know what's interesting about turntables, and not to derail the situation, but audiophiles and turntables, and if you're anything that you run something through is always going to color the signal to a degree, right?
Yep.
So your original mix, probably the closest you're going to get to, a mix from the studio is on a turntable, like dynamically speaking, anyway. But no matter what you run it through, you're always going to have some kind of coloration compared to, and obviously too, when you're talking about a mix, like if you were in the room mixing versus listening in your house, and you're listening on a record, you've gone down one generation anyway. But a lot of guys will get these like phono tube preamps, and you've seen these things that are just like, it looks like a hot rod almost, with like a shit ton of 12AX7s on the top of it. And if you think about it, they're enhancing the signal. They're not in any way trying to reproduce the exact type. Like, the way I look at it is, if you're going to be an audiophile, and I understand why these guys buy the speakers they do and buy the preamps that they do, but they are, in a sense, affecting the signal. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And if you really wanted to be as close to what it sounded like in the studio, which would not be, that would be like uber audiophile, right? Like they're audiophile guys who run like the most expensive speaker cable, and they run the most expensive speakers they can find, all this kind of stuff. But if you really wanted to be audiophile, you would run it as clean as possible through the cleanest amplifier possible into a set of like NS10s, right? Because that would be what the engineer was mixing on in the first place. That's what it sounded like. And that's not, that I guess is the closest to, but not the best sounding.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But I always find it funny, and I understand, I can totally see why these guys would run them through tube preamps. But if you've already added the even harmonics to something, going through a tube when you were recording each channel and each little separate piece of the mix, you're just adding, not insult to injury, but you're adding stuff that wasn't meant to be there in the first place, right?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry about the rant. I'm just
No, it's good information, because a lot of people they haven't really thought it through, because they're not on the recording side of things, and they haven't quite wrapped their head around the reality of how things are made. So they're looking at it from the playback side only, and that's half of the reality, right?
That's exactly what I was trying to get at. I just didn't have the right words for it, but that's exactly that. You're still in the grand scheme of things, you're still affecting what you're listening to. You're not listening to the purest version of what that was supposed to be. And the purest version was obviously the version that was recorded in the room at the time, the original master copy of the. If anything, record companies should, for audiophile reasons, give out wave file copies of 2496 stuff that you could listen to as a digital file that is like, this is what went to the mastering plant before the mastering plant cocked it up, or the, before the duplication plant is concerned. I totally derailed this situation, but
no, it's fine because it's all applicable. So basically, to give you more context for this particular dude, he's got a very high torque turntable, so it doesn't have any slop with speed or anything like that.
Explain torque. So the reasoning is that it runs at a bit higher of an RPM so that it never slows down too much. Is that what it is?
Well, it's got, it's got a direct drive, I think it's servo or stepper or whatever. I forget which kind they use in those, but it's it doesn't have the slop that a belt-driven system would have, because it's literally like controlled directly through gears and whatnot.
So you tell it to do 77 RPM.
It's doing 77, not any lower, not any higher. It's a constant speed, right?
Right, and that's the same as like the old tape decks. And part of the reason why some of the better tape decks, like a Denon or something like that, would be better, was they were using better rubber to drive the tape deck in the first place. So you were still getting a percentage off or on, but it was better quality in the components, right?
Yeah. So the technology from back in the hi-fi, boom, really wasn't there to keep things on a dead-on RPMs, right? But nowadays, with the DJ turntables, they have really, really good control of the speed of these things. So the modern Technic stuff is better at that than any, $10,000 1978 turntable ever. They're just really good at that sort of thing. I'm not an expert on this topic at all. I don't run vinyl. So, but I do know enough about it to be able to have a conversation with guys like this about their stuff.
I like the idea of vinyl. I just don't really, I don't know, not that I don't have the time for it, but
when I get older, I will probably have, some sort of a vinyl thing, because it's a good technology. There's issues with it as it ages and gets dirty or whatever, but in reality, it is probably one of the best recording technologies that we've ever come up with, because it is the signal, right? As long as it wasn't put through any sort of digital equipment before it got to the cutter, it is the signal, and it's really cool that way.
We've talked about that too. You really can't put it through too much digital to make the reproduction correct. The way we record nowadays doesn't make it really work to be able to make a record transfer. You need to really rethink your mix.
Yep.
In order to make any kind of an LP copy of something. So pretty much chances are 4 times out of 5, you are always going to get a different mix of whatever was on the CD or whatever was the final master. It's not an oversight. It's the same as doing a project and being like, okay, we're going to do this in 5.1, and as an afterthought do stereo. You can't do a project and go, this is stereo, and we're going to, as an afterthought, make it 5.1. You need to set out from the top that you're going to make a 5.1 mix, or you're going to make a stereo mix, or a mix for LP.
Yep.
And a mix for LP is stereo, but it's a whole different ballgame. And you almost need to take a different day to do that. And I think there's a lot of guys who, this is like super over the top thought process, but you can't just make a mix and make it quieter and say that's the LP mix. It's not the same difference.
No. You have to be able to understand the physics of what's going on with the cutter.
Exactly.
And it can't do some of the things that we can do in a digital file, and it's important to know what you can and can't do. I don't think either of us are experts, but the information's out there. You have to dig quite a bit to find that sort of stuff because it's sort of an esoteric art at this point.
It
Now,
is.
one thing I wanted to mention here is that most of the folks who listen to vinyl are listening to 78s, LPs. And this guy has got a different sort of collection. His are all 12-inch singles that are designed to run at 45 RPMs.
Oh.
So
okay.
we're talking about
Right.
more rare recordings and recordings that have a lot more room between the tracks to swing that needle back and forth. So
I got officially goosebumps on this.
so the focus on this guy, because he's an engineer and because he understands signals and all that, he's very specific in what he's done. So he's running very specific type of vinyl on this, and that's not the sort of thing that you would have really been able to get your hands on back in the day. It's it's a little more interesting. But so he takes the outputs right out. It's got a dedicated phono preamp solid state and a dedicated amplifier for each one of the speakers, both solid state, and they've been modified slightly by someone who modifies those particular ones. I mean, it's their job to take these off the shelf, change some specific things about the power supplies to clean them up, whatever. So he's also got some external hackery going on underneath for the power system. So, this guy's an engineer, and he approaches the problem like an engineer. He's got those giant box stack speakers, they're 5 foot tall, and, the like 15s on the bottom and ribbons up at the top sort of deal, right?
Yeah.
So,
Loving it.
And I mentioned earlier that he had the room built inside of his barn. It's a room in a room kind of thing. And he had it designed around the golden ratio, which, most of you guys out there who are interested in this show have probably heard of a little bit. If you build a rectangular room, there's a lot of problems that come into play. One way to alleviate it is to stick with the golden ratio of how far the walls are apart versus the ceiling and the floor and the other two walls. You can create a space that doesn't have very many resonant frequencies in it. So
it's sort of, to a degree, kind of the 3 to 1 rule, like when you're doing overheads or stereo miking, right?
It's all related math, yeah.
Yeah, cutting. The gist of it is cutting down on the earlier reflection time, right? Where when you have a signal that will reach a microphone or reach whatever the sound source is supposed to be quicker than where the direct sound source should be, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is basically the gist of the situation.
Yep.
The best example is when you're talking about recording a vocalist with a music stand in front of them. A lot of times the microphone isn't going to pick up the actual vocal coming out of the singer's mouth so much as it's going to pick up the reflection of the vocal coming off of the music stand into the microphone. And that's when you can get into some serious trouble. And that's like a recording sort of version of exactly what you're talking about with the golden rule.
Yep.
As far as building the room is concerned. And
now, you were talking earlier about how you like to record the hook for R&B stuff in the big room.
Yeah.
All right. So
that's exploiting that.
Exactly. And
it's exploiting it like I don't know.
Here's one of the problems I had with his setup. Now, obviously, it sounds very good.
Yeah.
Let's not even pretend. It
It's
sounds very good.
However, you got to be in the right spot, right?
Well, if you're in the right spot, sure. If you're in that sweet spot, which I was.
Sheldon on The Big Bang Theory.
Okay, so I'm in there. I'm in the sweet spot. It's all good, but the room is an office-sized room. Even though it's built to the golden ratio, it's still a small room. And the problem with that, with 15-inch speakers, is that low frequency content does not have time to propagate a full wavelength before it gets to you. You're getting it before it's
a quarter of what it should be.
Yeah. So that was a little bit problematic in my opinion. And also they're box speakers, and I'm used to listening to my system at home, which has Magnapan MMGs, which are dipole speakers they've got 4 square feet of resonant, surface that vibrates, right? So, and they're open on the front and the back. So you put those in the right spot and sit in the sweet spot, the speakers disappear and you're in the room with the band sort of feel, right? Whereas you sit in front of these hugely powerful towers, you can hear hugely powerful towers sitting in front of you.
That's exactly the thing. There's the difference between being in. Anybody can sort of catch this when they go to the theater, right? There's certain people who will sit at the back end of the row. There's certain people who will sit in the front of the room. There's certain people who will sit in the exact sweet spot. And even then, it's not always perfect, but it really kind of depends on the situation, obviously. But for me, I always tend to sort of sit in the back end of the room. That's just the way I am. I'm sort of losing my track here, but
well, I can interrupt you completely.
Yeah,
When
go,
I was
interrupt me. Go.
when I was at Pixar Animation Studios the other week,
Sure,
and in one of their private screening rooms where they watch their movies as they're working on them, I definitely noticed that there were a lot of seats right around the sweet spot and a lot more aisle space than what you see in normal theaters.
Right. And if you'll find that if you're in the back end of the room, everything is a lot quieter than it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And in the front, everything's direct. And it's obviously louder because you're closer to the speakers, but it's not built that way. I have an uncle that's a audiophile, and he's got the same sort of situation. He's got extremely expensive gear, and it's the same as a recording studio. You can have an extremely expensive mic preamp, but if you're recording in a closet, it's still going to sound like you're recording in a closet, And he's got a, sort of 10 by 8 kind of living room, and you watch a movie and it's good, but the problem is the same thing. The wave doesn't have time to propagate. It's boom, it's loud, it's whatever, but I mean, audiophile wise, it's not. You need the right room to do it properly.
Yeah,
and
if you want to listen to material that has 16-foot pipe organ notes in it, then forget about it. I mean, if you're in a small room, you're going to get the SPL off of it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what we're doing on time, but I actually had a semi-rant about live sound.
Okay, you got 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, good. All right. Okay, so we do this gig. My band does this gig at this rock and roll theater in Winnipeg, and we ended up getting bumped and ended up having to play at 1:15 in the morning. And I'd gotten there at 8:30 to get a decent parking space, and I brought my wife along and her friend and her husband, and so we're all kind of just basically waiting it out. So we finally get on stage, and we had played the basement of the joint, and the basement of the joint has a very limited monitor setup and less amplifiers and all this kind of stuff. But we get on the stage at the sort of big part of the room, and there is, give or take whisker, probably 15 people in the room. It's an L-shaped room with the back end of the room being sort of the pool hall kind of get away from the music area.
Ugh.
And we went on at 1:15. I got up at 3:30 in the morning. And the guy had the monitor mix was pinned through a super bad limiter, through a BBE sonic maximizer, so all the high end was ridiculous, and it was basically loud, like kind of sound. Like I didn't hear my band. It wasn't that the monitor mix was great; it was just ridiculously loud with no feedback. And as a sound guy, I got to protect my ears, and I didn't really wear headphone protection because I didn't think it having sort of played in the basements. I'd gotten used to sort of that sound quality. Um, so we're playing, and I literally walked off the stage behind all the monitors and everything and played off of the stage because the volume was so ridiculous. And like the band had an okay time, but I had points where I don't know if you've ever been in the show where it was so loud that your equilibrium goes off. Have you ever had that happen?
Well, I'm usually the sound guy, so I'd be the one who would go turn it down and get
Right.
back to it.
Now, as a side note, obviously this guy has his sort of stage mix set up for guys who bring 4x12s up, and he wants to be able to compete with that and be able to, give them a headphone mix. But the thing was, or not a headphone mix, recording guy. So I mean, we have like 30-watt amps, right? And there was the only point in time during the whole show that I actually heard myself was the one point in the songs where I'm the only guy playing. That was the only time I heard myself. The rest of the time, it was just basically loud. And there's one point in one song where the girl singer hits this wicked high note, and my whole world went right for like 3 minutes.
Wow.
Like, it was retarded. And when I say equilibrium, we're talking about your plane of sort of balance where
Yeah, that
everything's
happens
level.
in your ears, man.
Yes. And at the end of the show, I just sort of looked at the bass player and I'm like, I am never playing here again. And unfortunately, we have a gig this Friday there, so I don't even know what I'm going to do. But like, it was at the point where it didn't matter if we were in tune, on time.
Well, build yourself a little box that has 2/4-inch jacks and a potentiometer in there so you can attenuate it.
It was retarded. No, it would have been way over. We were probably at 145, 150 dB on stage, not like whatever was coming out front. It was like, I mean, the thing is, if you've got a room where you've got 300, like the room is set up to have 700 people in the room, but there was 15 people in the room. It was bouncing all over the friggin' place, and it's like, turn the shit down. If just cranking it up isn't going to make people come into the bar because there's a big party going on. It's really loud. Like it was painful. Like it was just so. Lesson number one in how not to be a live sound guy. Don't be a dick. But I'm almost at this point basically refusing to play at this joint. But
I think all budding sound guys should have to do at least I don't know, at least a dozen sessions at your local little church.
Speaker on a stick gig.
Because you've always got them little old ladies that sit right in the front row in front of the speakers.
I agree with you.
And they will turn around and they will look you right in the eye like you are the devil's spawn until you turn it down. Yeah.
It was retarded. Like, I don't even know. Like, I mean, if I was doing sound like that every night of the week, I don't think I would. If you go home as a sound guy and you can't hear, you're clearly doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the thing is, that volume probably would have been entirely fine if there was bodies in the room. But it was 1:00 in the morning. Like there was 20 people in the room at the very most. Like it was, Like I said, it didn't matter if I was in tune or not. Like it's just what the hell. Anyway, but yeah, that's the end of my story on that. Equilibrium, I guess, other than epic being the word of the day. Yeah, not smart, but yeah. Anyway, I think we're pretty well out of time.
Yes, we're out of time. And
or we probably are over time.
Hopefully, Shane didn't blot his hearing and ruin his future as a mixing engineer guy. Yeah. That would be bad.
Next gig, earplugs.
Totally. I'd rather you play badly than not be able to do your job.
Well, that's what I said. I was like, you know what? At this point, I don't know if they would notice if I'm not playing, but I think I might just pretend and just hit chords and hope for the best. Like just not hit anything and just stand there like a retard. But yeah,
Which he's good at, folks.
I'm a professional, actually.
All right,
Cool.
everyone.
Good night.
That's all the time we have for this week. You can find this show every Friday at patchbay.tv. There's also an RSS feed link there if you want to have the show automatically downloaded. That's it for us. We'll see you guys next week.